every single day there will be 11,200 people retiring every single day. Most of us as Americans have not saved enough to have the retirement that I think many of us want or envision. People who are highly active, your life will be happier and it will last longer. Someone said, "Oh, Susan, you're not retiring, you're just rewiring." And I kind of love that.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited to introduce you to my guest, who has been one of the original founders of executive coaching in the United States. She and two colleagues formed Executive Coaching Connections in Chicago, where they stayed headquartered throughout the time that they were leading the company, and most recently had the opportunity to exit the business with her other partners, leaving them with a lot of memories of a lot of great things that they did that were unique to the executive coaching profession. So I'm really delighted to have Susan Madonia with us today. She has some great ideas to share with us that should be interesting both to executives in role today, but also to people who are in a coaching role that may or may not come face to face with some clients who experience some of the things we'll talk about. So the topic for today is when your buzzer goes off. And Susan's going to explain to us what that means, and we'll offer you some really sage advice and some tips for getting ready for dealing with something like that. So Susan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's really great to be here, Louise. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
I am too. And as I've told Susan, what we want to do is just make this real time and be able to have a regular conversation. So tell me, Susan, what was the first thing that happened to you when you decided it might be time for you to sell the business or decide when it's time to exit your business and go on with a different part of your life?
Well, it's what I call a journey. And, it was certainly a journey for myself and my partners as we built executive coaching connections over many, many years. And we were all getting at an age where we coached on leaders about what their succession plan for the business is. And we started thinking, what is our succession plan for the value that we created in our coaching business that was on fire? It was growing globally. We were excited about it, but we all knew that we were heading into ages, the three of us, where we had to be thoughtful about what next.
Exactly.
And of course, there's the business element of what's next, but then there's the personal element. I have to say most of our energy went into the business side as opposed to what will this mean for me? So it clearly was.
I don't think that's uncommon from what I've heard.
No, it really isn't. And the irony is we coached on this. We would coach leaders all over the globe around, yes, you have the business element, but you also have the personal element, which was always fraught with a lot of uncertainty. And we weren't any different in that space.
Yeah. Wow. Who was first? Was there like one person who brought the subject up one day, or was this kind of a mutual timing thing that you've always planned to talk about when the timing was right?
Yes, great question. Life happens when you're thinking about other things. And honestly, we were so consumed about running the business. And, time goes so fast when you're busy, personally, professionally, all of us were. There were three partners. And, it sounds a little crazy, but, we had been talking about what will come next for the business. But all of a sudden, we all looked at each other. We all were having birthdays in and around the same time and said, okay, no kidding around. We got to get really serious about thinking about what this is going to mean for us going forward. Do we want to get people in to run the business? Do we want to sit on a board? Do we, there were many options. Do we want to sell the business? So all those things began spinning and became real as we were hitting some birthday markers, honestly. And we had been working the reality of everything kind of bubbled up 5 years, prior to us actually selling, actually
Oh,
5, 6
okay.
years. So it was
Wow.
a journey, definitely.
Wow. That's a long time to work towards something and come out with the right answers for which of those options you're going to take. I assume that you did some exploration on all of those.
We did. And, I laugh sometimes because we were talking with our accountant and she said, a partnership, a business partnership can actually be more difficult than the most difficult marriage in the world.
Agreed.
In that partners, we're all different. We have different styles and we all had different visions of what next for ourselves. Each of us had different agendas for our life, different visions for ourselves personally and for the business. So we had to, obviously come together, the three of us on what that picture looked like.
Well, that's, I'm sure, another podcast on how do you go
Oh,
through those
yes.
decisions.
Yes,
I'm
most
sure that
definitely.
you'll come out with a tool so we can all just use your advice on how to do that. So I appreciate you sharing this personal angle to the topic today of when your buzzer goes off. And I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about, share some of the anecdotes that I know go along with that. So where do you want to start?
Yeah, well, of kind of a funny story and an interesting story is when we all started thinking about, so what next for the business? Um, my partner, we get a local newspaper, and there was a syndicated journalist who happened to be a psychologist. Love his articles. So this is his thinking, not mine. But he wrote this, what I thought, fascinating article. His name was Ashley Brilliant. I do think he's brilliant, by the way. But it was about this time of the year, springtime, and he wrote about March Madness and the women and men playing basketball, the college athletes, and how in March Madness they would go on the court, give everything they had during the game, tears, fears, cheers, all the emotion that one actually sees when you're watching March Madness.
Yeah.
And then they'll play their heart out. And then all of a sudden, at a given defined point of time, the buzzer goes off and the game is over. And there's no, kind of retracting back and saying, can we have one more second or one more minute? And it's
Right.
a very definitive demarcation, whether win, lose, the players walk off. They certainly have their decision how they want to react to the win or the lose, but it's a demarcation in time. It's very clear, and
Mm.
there's no going back. So my partner, as I had been talking about retiring for many, many years, he kept asking me, well, when is your buzzer going to go off? Um, and of course, for all of us in our careers, when there's a major milestone like retirement, there's a lot that goes into the thinking about,
I'm
you
sure.
know, what do I want to do? And when will my buzzer go? And I didn't know how to answer the question because one year led into another year, led into another year. And it was really daunting. And what I find to be, Louise, so interesting is here and now in this time frame we're living. The topic of retirement is fascinating because in 2024 there were 4.1 million people who turned 65. What that equates to and what the reality of that is in 2004 to 2027, every single day there'll be 11,200 people retiring
Is
every
that right?
single day. And I find those numbers to be fascinating. Of course, it's the baby boomer wave.
Yeah.
But what I find even more fascinating is thinking about the stages in our life. And when we were in high school, thinking possibly about what are we going to do with our life after high school,
Yeah.
our parents and ourselves, we spend a tremendous amount of time taking tests, college visits. What do I want to do with my career? We spend a tremendous amount of time reflecting, thinking, testing ourselves, talking to people, networking. However, this concept of retirement, it's almost like running the 50-yard dash and crossing the finish line and saying, I'm done. And if financially I'm okay, I'm done. And I think there's some lessons to be learned, either when we're coaching and working with people thinking about retirement, or we're facing that ourselves.
Well, so the buzzer goes off, and that it sounds as if everybody has one. Do you think that's true? That there is just a moment in time where you just fit of peak or completed something really big and you realize you don't want to do that again or something along those lines? Is that what happens, you think?
Well, I don't, I'm not sure. I think in one respect, it would be wonderful, if, there was some designated buzzer that went off and you just knew. I mean, for me, it was a 5-year journey about, oh, gee, I think I want to do this. And then I retracted back and thought, gosh, what am I going to do with myself if I retire?
Yeah.
Um, what was fascinating at Executive Coaching Connections, we came up with what we call an executive partner program. It was just a very fascinating program where we brought in C-suite leaders. These were recent retirees, most of them, that were recently in very, very large companies, big jobs in all functional areas. And as we went around the room and many of them introduced themselves, many of them said, well, I'm here and I'm excited about supporting leaders, mentoring leaders in Executive Coaching Connections and now Aerial Group. And I failed at retirement, you know, and I found that fascinating because these are, captains of industry, leaders, and 3/4 of them kind of said, well, I'm not good at retirement. And it got me really thinking about your question about, when does your buzzer go off and what does it mean to retire? And I think years ago, there was kind of a concrete belief when you retire, you pack up your suitcase or you relax and sit back and enjoy life. And now I think retirement can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. So the blessing is, I think retirees have more choices. The curse is they have more choices. And my belief is that we actually need to spend more time thinking about what success looks like in as we approach retirement and even way before we hit retirement.
Let me just pull up a minute on this. So, what you're saying is going all the way back to high school, leading into college, early in our lives, early in our careers, before we even have a career, we're worried about school and what that means for our careers. And then we get into the career path and we're just there for 40 years or whatever it is, right? And when we're in the middle of it and we're having fun and making money and life is happening, you don't even think about the long term. But in point of fact, from what you're saying, it sounds like there's a need for some pulling up, doing some reflection on, okay, where am I now? And when do I think I want to stop doing what I'm doing? Or when do I think I'm ready for something completely different? Something
Sure.
along those lines, right? And
Yeah.
and so tell me a little bit about what you've seen in terms of maybe it's from these CEOs or maybe it's from the more recent experience as you were exiting the business to feel did I do this at the right time? Should I have started planning this when I was 40? What summer takeaways would you offer on when should you start reflecting on this? When should you start planning? I think we all know the financial planning aside. I'm talking about
Mhm.
what you're describing as a monumental turn, pivot, whatever you want to call it. It is significant and it's different than anything we've done before. So how do you kind of creep up on that?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's awareness, and I think it's so different for everybody. And there's so many, as I mentioned, options that people can look at. I found it fascinating, because when I Googled retirement, by and large, most of what comes up is the financial, and it
Sure.
should be. I mean, the financial is very, very, critical, important. But what I found interesting is there seems to be a gap around, um, helping retirees think about what success looks like for their retirement and defining that and really thinking about that. And like I said, there's so many options. There's what we're calling now, or what I've read, micro retirement,
Tell
which
us
might
about that.
yeah, which simply means that, we're going full tilt working, many executives are working extreme hours, far more than 40 hours a week.
Sure.
But micro retirement may be taking a 5-day week or a 6-day week and pulling that down to 2 or 3. Now, some people have options to do that. I had an option in my recent employment where I went from 5 days to 2 days. Now, I ended up working far more than that, but it's going from full throttle to something far less than that. Others find, I have a good friend who said, my focus is going to be philanthropic work. That is what,
Mhm.
absolutely excites me. And there's everything in between. But what we know for sure, Louise, is that there's been an awful lot of research out in the marketplace that when we retire, when, say, our buzzer goes off or someone rings our buzzer for us and says, "You're done,"
Oh, that can
whatever that
happen
is.
too. Yes.
Yeah, that can happen too, and it often does.
Yeah.
People tend to fall into 2 buckets, and I think this is really important, and I call this pull in or push out. The pull in bucket is when people retire, they tend to pull in. In other words, some words that might describe the pull in would be solitude, maintaining, maybe sedentary, a bit inactive. In other words, the feeling is I crossed the finish line. I had an aunt who said, once I retire, I want to read books and watch videos. That's what I want to do. Um, that was an extreme pull in strategy. The other is the push out, which, again, gross generalization, but those are people who are highly active. They're engaged, they're traveling, they're learning new things, going to new classes, connecting, active. What they found in the research is not surprising. The push out, the active, your life will be happier and it will last longer. Of course, we have many retirees in between, but really giving forethought into what does success look like for me, from many perspectives, health wise, engagement wise, is really, really important. In the research said, really telling us that it will have an impact on how long we live, which is pretty powerful.
What does it say about that
Well,
longevity?
yeah, I mean, the research basically says that the more, obviously the more active physically, mentally, emotionally we are
Hmm.
as retirees, the happier we will be and the longer we will live.
Okay.
Um,
Makes sense.
so, thinking about these various elements of retirement is very critical. And, one of the takeaways is, some people in their 40s or 50s, may think that's far away. but to begin thinking, really, really thinking and giving time like we gave time in our life early on after high school graduation of who we want to be and what does our career look like. I would argue we should put certainly as much time and pre-plan for that day when our buzzer goes off, whether our choice or somebody else's choice.
So, what would that pre-planning consist of? If you think about the family being involved when you were going to go to college, there was a financial component, there was an interest component,
Mm-hmm.
there was a I'm sure, social component being considered,
Sure.
and I'm sure many other things, how far away you are from the family and things along those lines. So when you stop to think about that, you're always so good at coming up with models and tools. That's one of the
Uh-huh.
things I've always loved about the ECC model. What did you come up with for this? Like what tool could we use to make us think about these things?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And as I was coaching executives, and many of them felt, safe in a coaching
Sure.
engagement to
Yeah.
talk about really where do I go? I mean, after this gig is over and in the corporate world, where do I go? I'm many of them had questions about how do I even begin thinking about it. And we really, came up with what I call map, your retirement map. And the first that we, glanced over, and there's so much information about it, is M, which is money and financial security. I'll just say a word about this. There's, you could do probably 100 sessions on this, and there's a lot of great people who have fabulous information. But the average American right now, Louise, has about $333,940 saved for retirement. The medium amount that Americans have saved is 87,000.
Well,
And about 3.2% of the US retirees have $1 million. So anything that you read, and there's a lot of information about that, but what is concerning is that most of us as Americans have not saved enough to have the retirement that I think many of us want or an envision. And that's going to have limitations on, certainly the choice of what we do, with our retirement. But I just mentioned it again, the M, there's a lot of information out there for people to pursue. The A in your retirement map is agility. And I think this is really, really important because, as I mentioned earlier, life often happens when you're busy doing other things, right? And that's true with retirement. It was true for me when I retired. I had, I practiced a bit of what I preached in that I had a plan. I had a thought. I wrote down, what really would blow my hair back in retirement, what would be the important elements. And life happened. There were some illnesses in my family that really shifted where I was putting my energy. And I think it is realistic to expect that there's going to be wonderful things that happen and not so wonderful things. There's, new babies being born, there's death, there's illness, there's, children issues, there's a number of things that will come up, unexpected expenses. So being agile and being able to have a plan, but know that it may shift and maybe even do a little scenario planning is important.
Hmm.
So we got money, we got agility, and the third, and I think it's really, really an important third. It's called what I call psychological planning.
Hmm.
And it's the P in your retirement map. And the psychological planning is spending concentrated time, really thinking about what success looks like. Oftentimes in a coaching engagement, I would ask my clients, as we work together, what does success look like
Mm-hmm.
for us working together and you working on the two or three given areas that you define that you want to improve your leadership quotient on. And the same is true for retirement. What does success look like? And I guarantee you, if you have 10 retirees in a room, that psychological plan or that plan will look different for different people. But I
Mm-hmm.
call it a psychological plan because there's so little right now. There's little time that we focus on our psychological plan, and there really isn't the resources like there are in the financial planning. There's really little resources on what does that look like? What are the resources for me as I retired? I think ARP does a great job providing some support, a lot of support in that area. But it's really, really worthy, Louise, of people taking time, even in their 40s, to think about what will make me happy when I do retire. What are the components? And like I said, for many of us, it can become a race and we cross the finish line and say, woohoo, I'm done. And then after the first couple weeks of retirement and doing all those things we wanted to do, if we don't have a plan in place, it can get disheartening or really kind of our expectations can really dip. So I again, the takeaway here is spending time with yourself, your spouse, your partner. If you're solo, really being clear. Back in my 50s, I think it was probably late 40s, I thought getting into the coaching business would be great because I knew in my corporate career, I wouldn't be able to ease into retirement, which I wanted to kind of scale down slowly and gradually as opposed to an event. I knew enough about myself that that would be too hard for me to do. And that really led me into a career shift and change into the coaching business, which I thought would really support that P in my
Mm-hmm.
retirement map.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. About 10 years ago, a friend of mine that I worked with for years, his name is Morgan, Eileen Morgan, but we all called her Morgan. Um, she was talking about having a third quarter. So going back to the sports analogy, that it's not over yet. We still have we're gifted with health and being able to travel and have all this wisdom built up from all these
Sure.
years of all these things we've dealt with. And so sounds similar to what you're talking about with your plan, which is to sit down with somebody, talk it out, get some help from other people, not necessarily your partner or not necessarily a therapist, but someone who can help you think through the options that you have. So,
Exactly. And like I said, I mean, I'm fortunate to have worked with executives globally. And for every person that I've talked to who's been starting to think about retirement, everyone's different and everybody wants different things in that third quarter. Someone said, "Oh, Susan, you're not retiring, you're just rewiring." And I kind of love that
yeah.
because whatever you deem as what success looks like in retirement, that's great. But just do it intentionally and don't let it happen to you because, and I don't, I have found that many men have probably defined themselves a bit more, at least my experience working with clients about their identity is so linked to what they do. Now more women to some degree. And, you know, being able to be planful for that third chapter is really important because there have been many, many people that I know retired, no plan, and became very, frankly, depressed and a little delusioned with the whole concept of, I thought this was going to be great and it's not what I thought. And I think a lot of that could be mitigated, if you will, by spending that time on the psychological planning for retirement, the P in the retirement map.
You're making me think about friends that when I was in college, I would meet their parents who some of them were a little on the older side and were about to retire. And what you're making me remember are those people who had this event occur where they retired, they stepped down from their job and left the company. And in one case that just stands out in my mind as we're talking, he had a heart attack and died the week after he retired. And what
Yeah,
you're talking about here is that lack of planning and that almost obsessive planning to get to the day, but not
hmm,
thinking about, day zero in the third quarter, like now what?
absolutely.
Right. And so I hear what you're saying. And I'm wondering if, I think since 2020, I'll just leave it that way. But I think the generations who have come of age and are in the working labor force today have done more to save than our generation, for example. If we're part of the boomers, we were, part of have 10 MasterCards and load them up, right? I mean, it's
Right.
I mean, I look back at the things we used to do. Oh my God, I'm at my limit on this one. Let me up a new one and transfer that to this. And yeah, I mean, it's just I think about the shenanigans that went on in the 80s and the 90s with credit cards and stuff. It was just
Sure,
insane.
sure.
Um, and now today, I think based on people losing their jobs, a lot of layoffs, a lot of rifts, now we have Doge,
Hmm.
that people begun to realize that the end may not be when they want it to be. This may or may not be controllable. And
Hmm.
so to me, that says move back this idea of thinking about this and planning ahead for this to an earlier point in your life. You were saying earlier about do it, in your 40s, start thinking about this, assuming that they entered the workforce in their 20s and they've been socking money aside for all kinds of things ever since. Some people, I'm sure, are very thrifty and probably fall into that. What percent was that again? Like 0.5% or something, 3.2% that have $1 million in the bag.
Yeah.
I know my niece's first child right now is 21. In fact, he's almost 21 and he has a house already.
Hmm.
So that the types of decisions being made by more recent generations, I think, are really interesting. And maybe that's their experience with us getting hired and fired and moving and all those things has done that to them. I'm not sure, but I think psychologically they're ready for anything.
Yeah,
And
and
so,
and yeah, and
yeah.
a lot of, of course, a lot of our younger folks, I think about my daughter who's in her late 20s. She really has never experienced a recession and what
Oh,
that
yeah.
means.
Hmm.
And, but what we do know is to your point with baby boomers, there is a wave of all of us baby boomers, coming to that age where as we know, just looking at celebrities and in TV personalities, I mean, there's people in their late 70s, 80s working, living their best lives. And there are other people who can't wait, if they can get, to 62 or 59 or 50 and call it a day,
Yeah.
that's success. So it's a very individualized sport, this thing called life and retirement. But we know for sure there is an enormous wave of people turning 65 right now, right here and now, and grappling with all the dimensions of retirement. And my key thought of really speaking with you today is my experience with executive coaching, working with executives. Um, is great. Get that financial plan wired. We can throw out statistics, numbers. Many, executives are agile, but where we do miss is giving the thought and time around the psychology or the psychological safety around retirement. What does that look like for me, my spouse, my family? How can I make it so that it's all that we hope that it may be for us one day? There just seems to be less thinking on that front, and I'm guilty of it myself, even though I preach the MAP principle. And as we all know, time goes by fast. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't believe, it feels like just yesterday I was, in my 20s, geared up for my career, and here we are. So that time does go fast, and it's just making sure that at different stages in our lives that we're taking stock and writing down, even if we have to go back to being agile and changing the plan, but putting a plan together, so that when that buzzer goes off, either for us or we decide it's all in everything we dreamed it would be and hope that it would be for ourselves, our family. And that's why I'm pretty passionate about the topic.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing all of this. And obviously the tool that you're leaving us with is, spend some more time on the P. It's a big P,
Yeah,
psychological planning. And I think
exactly.
about, the earlier retirements of some of the business people that I worked with and coaching them. And I do agree with you that more people are starting to target mid 50s. And even in my own family, my nephew said that to me the other day. He said, I think I'm going to work until I'm like 54, 55, and then I'm going to take it easy. So taking it easy is, some idea of sitting on the couch like your aunt and watching movies. But, like Corbusier says, I have this sign. This is actually framed in one of my rooms here at home. My mother gave me this idea, and I found the quote is, we're always the same age in mind. In our heads, we're 21, 16, 35, whatever it is. We see ourselves
Yes.
as being much younger than we are. And that goes right in line with my mother always saying it's just a number. She worked
Yes.
it till she was 85, and I
Wow.
kept waiting for the phone call. Like, okay, I'm going to retire now. I kept waiting and waiting. I thought, how long is she going to keep doing this? But she was loving her work and she didn't want to stop. And she had all her friends. And, there were so many reasons why she was
Absolutely.
drawn to keep doing it. And I got that phone call one day that she was, hanging up her uniform, so to speak. And it it was interesting to just hear that from her. And you
Yeah.
think about how many other people clocked out at 65 and have had 20 years of traveling all over the world. We all want to do something different. But what I'm thinking from hearing this today is there's a very big market out here for helping future retirees figure this out. And the psychological factors are going to be very heavy in all of this. And
Mm-hmm.
particularly moving that deadline back to the 50s, changes your health and everything else that you can do. So it sounds to me, since, this is a huge market, if 11,200 people in the next how many years? 20 years? 10 years?
Up to up to 2027, we can expect
2027.
roughly over 11,000 people retiring a day. A day.
So we have a
So,
couple more years here that if we started a business offering the psychological coaching for retirement, we could make a lot of money.
most definitely. Well,
Are you
exactly.
interested in starting another business?
Um, I'd have to give it some thought. I'd have to put it in.
I
I'd
would
have
put
to put
that
it
out
in my
there to you.
retirement map and see how it calculates out to,
Yeah. Okay.
the
Well,
overall equation of what my retirement looks like.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I'm following in my mother's footsteps. I love what I do, and I can't imagine
That's
getting
great.
out and not having anything to do. And I just really want to thank you for your thoughtfulness on this topic and your willingness just weeks out of the job to be able to reflect enough to do a podcast about that decision point. So, on behalf of everyone who's listening and all the people that in the future are going to be retiring, we'll be playing this a lot and thinking about what you've said. Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today.
Oh,
And I
Louise, this
look
was
forward
fun.
to staying in touch as you move on into the next chapter.
Sounds great. It was a lot of fun. I hope it's helpful, to some of your listeners. And like I said, it's such an individual decision, but I just hope everybody takes a little time thinking about that psychological planning as they cross the finish line and their buzzer goes off.
All right. Well, thank you, Susan. We'll have to give out buzzers for anybody who answers the questions we'll put out there in the blog after this. But thank you again. And to everybody, we'll see you at the next episode.